hurt you, and then walked away as if you meant absolutely nothing, as if your pain was invisible, as if your love never existed. That moment when your heart was shattering into 1,000 silent pieces and they didn't even flinch, that is where your transformation began. It didn't feel like it at the time, but something inside you stirred. Something stronger than the heartbreak, stronger than the betrayal. It was the beginning of your awakening. You kept replaying everything in your mind, hoping to make sense of it all. The smiles, the promises, the soft words, they all turned to ashes in your hands. You wondered how someone could look you in the eyes, hurt you so deeply, and then carry on like you were just a chapter they had finished reading. You gave them your vulnerability. You gave them truth. You gave them the kind of love that could heal a broken soul. But they didn't want healing. They wanted control. They hurt you because your light exposed their darkness. It sounds simple, almost poetic, but the depth of this truth can change how you view everything that happened. People who are emotionally broken, manipulative, or narcissistic are often not driven by love, empathy, or accountability. Instead, they are driven by fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being exposed, fear of confronting parts of themselves they've spent their entire lives hiding from. When someone like you comes into their life, someone who is genuine, emotionally aware, and deeply loving, it creates a mirror. That mirror reflects back everything they don't want to face. You didn't cause their darkness, but you illuminated it. And for someone who thrives in control and emotional manipulation, that is terrifying. Your presence held a kind of truth they couldn't run from. You showed up with honesty, depth, and care. You didn't play games. You didn't hide your emotions. You made them feel seen. But to someone who wears a mask every day, being seen is threatening. They build their identity on false layers, ego, lies, projections. And your light started to strip those away. You weren't attacking them, you were just being you. But the purity of your love made their wounds ache, not because you hurt them, but because you reminded them of what they were not. When people carry emotional wounds that they refuse to heal, they become hostile to anything that resembles healing. That's why instead of leaning into your warmth, they tried to destroy it. Instead of appreciating your heart, they played with it. You didn't confuse them. They understood your love. But it was that very understanding that made them push you away. Because if they allowed themselves to accept what you were offering, they would have to confront the reasons they never felt worthy of love in the first place. So they hurt you, not because you were too much, but because you were everything they couldn't be. You became a threat without ever intending to. And after hurting you, they acted like nothing happened. Because acknowledging the pain they caused would require them to feel guilt, shame, or remorse. But those emotions only arise in people who have the courage to self-reflect. They would rather live in denial than admit to themselves that they broke something that was real. It wasn't about you. It was about what you symbolized. You symbolized love, truth, transparency, things they couldn't give, things they didn't feel secure enough to receive. So instead of rising to your level, they dragged you down to theirs. They tried to rewrite the story to make you doubt your own worth. But deep down, they always knew what you were. And that's why they tried to dim your light. Because your light reminded them of everything they've buried inside themselves. And now that you've survived the hurt, you need to understand this truth fully. You were not rejected because you lacked value. You were rejected because your value was too overwhelming for someone who hasn't done the inner work to appreciate it. The pain you felt wasn't a reflection of your flaws. It was a reflection of their fears. The silence after the storm wasn't peace. The reason they hurt you is not because you were weak, but because you were powerful in a way they couldn't control. And no matter how much they pretend like nothing happened, your light has already done its job. It exposed what needed to be seen. It broke the illusion. And one day, that same light will guide you to someone who isn't afraid of it. Someone who stands in it with you, unafraid, unashamed, and ready. Until then, never stop being who you are. Let your light shine even brighter and bring divinity into our world. The light that you are called to be. Their denial is a defense mechanism, not innocence. When someone deeply hurts you and then acts like nothing ever happened, it can leave you feeling shattered and invisible. You start to question everything. Was it all real? Did they even care? How could they move on so easily while you're left drowning in the aftermath? But what you must understand is that their ability to move on isn't a sign of emotional strength or innocence. It's a sign of emotional avoidance. They deny the reality of your pain because to accept it would mean confronting their own behavior. And that's something they're emotionally unequipped to do. People who hurt others without remorse have often built their lives on defense mechanisms. These are the psychological walls they've constructed over the years to protect themselves from guilt, shame, and emotional accountability. They learn to suppress their feelings, shift blame, and rewrite reality so that they can continue living without facing themselves. So when they hurt you and pretend like nothing happened, it isn't because they forgot. It's because acknowledging it would shatter the false identity they've created. And that identity is fragile. It can't withstand the weight of real accountability. To accept that they caused you pain would require empathy. That they couldn't be bought because they can't withstand the weight of real accountability. It would require sitting with the discomfort of their actions, feeling the guilt of betrayal, and perhaps even offering a sincere apology. But they can't go there. Because once they begin to feel, they'd have to feel everything they've buried. And that kind of emotional excavation terrifies them. It's easier for them to deny the damage than admit they were the ones who caused it. This is why they rewrite the story in their heads. They minimize what happened. They rationalize their actions. They tell themselves you were too sensitive, too emotional, too dramatic. They turn the narrative around so they don't have to carry the weight of what they've done. That's not innocence. It's self-preservation. It's the ego protecting itself from collapse. You must stop expecting them to give you the kind of closure that requires emotional maturity. They are not capable of facing the truth in its raw, painful reality. They live behind emotional walls, and within those walls, there is no room for the truth of your pain. And so they act like nothing ever happened. They smile, they move on, they pretend, but none of that is proof that they didn't hurt you. It's only proof that they are running from the reality of what they did. Don't confuse their silence with peace. Don't confuse their indifference with strength. What looks like emotional detachment on the outside is often emotional chaos on the inside, hidden, repressed, and slowly rotting away. They are not at peace. They are at war with themselves. A war they've learned to ignore. A war they've silenced so deeply that they no longer hear the screams of their own conscience. And that's the tragedy of it all. You were willing to talk, to work it through, to grow from it, but they weren't. Because growing requires honesty, and honesty requires facing the impact of your actions. They couldn't face what they did to you because they've never even faced what was done to them. So let go of the illusion that their denial means they're right. Let go of the hope that one day they'll wake up and understand what they've done. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But your healing can't be tied to their awakening. Your pain was real. Their lack of reaction doesn't invalidate it. When someone deeply wounds you and shows no emotion, no guilt, and no regret, it can feel as though your entire reality is collapsing. You start to second guess everything you felt. You wonder if you overreacted, if maybe it wasn't as serious as it felt. You begin to shrink your truth just to make sense of their silence. But the truth is, their reaction or lack of it does not determine the validity of your experience. Your pain is not measured by their ability to feel it. It is measured by what it cost you emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. When you love deeply, when you care sincerely, when you give someone your time, energy, and trust, it is devastating when that person turns around and treats you like nothing happened. It's like grieving someone who is still alive, someone who walks past you as if you never existed. The hardest part isn't just what they did, it's how they acted afterwards. Their coldness, their detachment, their complete indifference to your suffering. But just because they didn't acknowledge your pain doesn't mean it didn't happen. It did. It mattered. It was real. You cannot look to the one who broke you to validate your wounds. That's like asking the storm to apologize for the flood. People who are emotionally numb or disconnected from their actions don't carry the tools required to truly see or feel your pain. They may never admit the impact of what they did. They may never say sorry, but that doesn't erase the emotional damage. Your tears were not wasted. Your breakdowns were not dramatic. They were the evidence of a soul that had been pushed too far, too hard, for too long. You don't need someone else's guilt to confirm your truth. Pain is not something that needs permission to be real. If it hurt you, it's valid. If it confused you, it's valid. If it changed you, it's valid. Don't fall into the trap of gaslighting yourself just because they refuse to acknowledge their part. Emotional invalidation is one of the most damaging forms of manipulation, and silence, indifference, and avoidance are tools that people use to keep you questioning your own sanity. They may never talk about what happened. They may act like they're unaffected. They may even blame you or dismiss the entire experience. But what they say or do now cannot erase what you went through. You lived it. You felt it in your body, in your chest, in your spirit. It woke you up in the middle of the night. It made you question your worth. It broke your trust in people. That's real. And you have every right to acknowledge it, honor it, and heal from it, whether they admit it or not. What you need to hold on to is this: your pain is a message, not a mistake. It is not something to be ashamed of. It's a sign that you loved with sincerity, that you showed up with openness, and that you were affected by betrayal because you're human and you care. The fact that they didn't feel anything doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. It makes you whole. It makes you someone who didn't numb themselves into apathy just to survive. The fact that they didn't feel anything doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. It makes you whole. It makes you someone who didn't numb themselves into apathy just to survive. It's not natural. It makes you human. It makes you human. It makes you human. They might walk away unaffected, but you will rise healed. You will take every tear, every sleepless night, every unanswered question and turn it into fuel. Because your healing does not require their remorse. Your peace does not depend on their apology. What happened, happened. It left a scar, but it also gave you wisdom. And that wisdom will carry you forward, far beyond the silence they left behind. You were too real for someone who lives in pretend. That truth, as heavy as it feels, is the very key to your freedom. The pain you felt wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because you were more than they could handle. You brought your full self to someone who only knew how to bring fragments. You spoke with honesty to someone who only knew how to lie. You showed up with loyalty to someone who was already halfway out the door, planning their next move. So if you're feeling you couldn't do this without the Lord's passion and power to put what you knew this time on the line. That's why it felt so one-sided. You were grounded in truth while they floated in illusion. People who live behind masks don't want to be seen. They construct identities to keep others at a distance. Their charm is strategic. Their affection is calculated. Their words are rehearsed. And then someone like you enters their life. Someone who doesn't play games, who speaks from the soul, who listens with the heart. At first, they're drawn to your energy. They're magnetized by the purity in your spirit. But soon, that same purity becomes uncomfortable because it starts to pull at the lies they've been telling themselves. You didn't threaten them with anger or control. You threatened them with truth. And that's something they can't stand for long. When someone is used to performing, to manipulating, to presenting an idealized version of themselves to the world, they fear emotional intimacy. Real connection terrifies them, not because they don't want it on some level, but because they don't know how to sustain it without being exposed. You ask nothing extraordinary from them, just honesty, presence, effort. But even that was too much, because those things require someone to put their walls down. And for them, vulnerability feels like death. So they pretend. They act like they're capable of deep love. They act like they're loyal, honest, invested, but it's all surface. They give you just enough to keep you hoping, just enough to keep you questioning, just enough to keep you around, until one day you realize it was all a performance. They wanted your admiration, your loyalty, your light, but they never intended to give you the same in return. Why? Because doing so would mean stepping out of the false reality they've carefully built. And that would mean facing themselves. You were too real for them, and deep down they knew it. They knew they couldn't fake it forever. They knew you'd eventually see behind the mask. That's why they began to distance themselves, devalue you, or even discard you. Not because you failed, but because you saw too much. You saw through the charm. You noticed the inconsistencies. You questioned the lies. And for someone who survives by pretending, being seen is terrifying. You didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you did everything right. You loved with depth. You stayed honest. You tried to understand. But the truth is, someone who lives in illusion will always feel exposed next to someone who walks in truth. You represented everything they could never be without confronting their shadow. So they left, or they broke you down just to protect the false self they built. Let this be your reminder. You are not too much. You are not too emotional. You are not too intense. You are real in a world that teaches people to fake it. And the right people, the healed, the whole, the honest, they won't run from your truth. They'll honor it. They'll stand in it with you. Until then, don't shrink. Don't dull your light. Don't pretend to be less so others can feel more. You were too real for someone who was too afraid to be. And that is not a loss. It's a revelation. Closure doesn't come from them. It comes from within. One of the hardest truths to accept after being hurt by someone you deeply cared about is that you may never get the apology, the explanation, or the understanding you deserve. You wait, you hope, you replay conversations. You imagine what you would say if you had just one more chance to make them see the damage they caused. But those thoughts only deepen the wound. Because the kind of person who can hurt you and walk away without looking back is not the kind of person who can give you closure. They don't have the emotional maturity, self-awareness, or courage to face what they've done. And waiting for them to suddenly become someone they never were only keeps you tied to their absence. Closure is not something they give you, it's something you build within yourself, piece by piece, through acceptance and self-healing. At first it feels unfair. You gave your all and they walked away like nothing happened. You're left bleeding and they're living their life as if your existence no longer matters. That silence feels like a punishment. But what you don't see at first is that silence is actually your opportunity to heal without further contamination. Their presence wasn't bringing you peace. It was keeping you in pain. You have to stop looking backward to move forward. That's not easy when everything inside you still wants answers. Why did they lie? Why did they change? Was anything even real? But the truth is, even if they sat down and gave you every explanation in the world, it still wouldn't change what they did. Words don't heal wounds. Actions do. And someone who cared would have shown it would matter most. They didn't, and that's your answer, even if it's not the one you wanted. Real closure happens the moment you decide you're done trying to understand someone who made no effort to understand you. It's the moment you stop rereading the messages, stop stalking their life from the shadows, stop waiting for them to wake up and realize they lost someone irreplaceable. It's not an instant switch, a slow, painful, but powerful process of reclaiming your peace without needing anyone else to validate it. It begins with choosing yourself, with saying, even if I never hear from them again, I deserve to be free. You stop obsessing over the lie and start focusing on your truth. You stop hoping they'll return and start trusting that life removed them for a reason. You let go of the fantasy that they'll become who you needed and accept that who they were was never enough. And in doing so, you begin to take back the power you gave away. Every time you close the door a little tighter, every time you silence that urge to reach out, every time you remind yourself of what you went through, you are giving yourself the closure they never could. You are showing your inner self that you don't need them to acknowledge your pain in order to honor your healing. You are proving to yourself that your peace is not dependent on someone else's remorse. One day, without even realizing it, you'll wake up and feel lighter. You won't crave an apology. You won't wonder where they are or what they're doing. The ache will begin to fade, replaced by strength and wisdom. And that is true closure. Not a conversation, not a text, not an explanation, but the peace you find when you finally accept that what they couldn't give you you gave to yourself. That's when the story stops being about how they broke you and becomes about how you put yourself back together. Your rise is more powerful than their silence. When someone hurts you and walks away as if you never mattered, they expect your silence to mean surrender. They assume that if they don't acknowledge your pain, it will fade into nothing. They think that if they stay quiet long enough, you'll eventually forget what happened. Or even worse, you'll begin to blame yourself. But what they fail to understand